Pizzeria Simulator is a divisive game, which is a shock to me because up until I announced this video some weeks ago and got some responses about it, I had only really seen a handful of comments who had critiques for Pizzeria Simulator, and most of those were about like one specific factor or another. But yeah, it truly is. Turns out that most of the community-wide acceptance that Pizzeria Simulator was the perfect finale for Fnaf, well, either I exaggerated it in my mind or something has changed. Perhaps like how responses to Sister Location have changed over the years, mine included. But Pizzeria Simulator is a different beast from Sister Location. It is a much trickier creature to dissect and understand, and today that is what I'm going to be doing. I will be deconstructing and critiquing the game piece by piece, gameplay, story, design, the whole shebang. And perhaps by the end you'll see why my own personal feelings about Pizzeria Simulator haven't really changed that much. But before we begin, let's go through the lead up to the release of this undeniably important game. Pretty much the grand finale to years of Five Nights at Freddy's games and the end of an era. It was shadow dropped. Okay, not quite. The release of Pizzeria Simulator was hyped up, but it wasn't revealed to be the next big mainline Fnaf game. It was teased to be a side game where you could run your own business and manage your animatronics. I feel like this method was a double-edged sword because, yes, everyone very quickly found out about the ruse once it was released, but anyone who was looking forward to that simulator wasn't exactly getting that. I'll cover that in gameplay. So, the game is dropped, and folks were playing it, and after the introduction 8-bit minigame of Freddy tossing pizzas, a new variation of Circus Baby herself appears in an opening cutscene where we are apparently interviewing her, and it is then that the cover is pulled off, and this is revealed to not just be Pizzeria Simulator, but Fnaf 6. Or Fnaf 7 if you count Fnaf World as a mainline game. I kind of don't, I count it as a spinoff, so Fnaf 6. Now before I hop into the gameplay, there's one thing I should quickly cover. Unlike the Fnaf games before it, Pizzeria Simulator was entirely free. And yes, if I recall right, Fnaf World was briefly up for sale before it went free to play. I remember that happening, so. I know there are some folks that believe that you can't really critique a game if it's free, or at least that warrants an amount of slack. I don't really agree. I do believe price absolutely should be taken into account. But I think a game that's free can still be critiqued. Especially in the case of Pizzeria Simulator, as we can compare it to Ultimate Custom Night, the Troll games, Fnaf World, or even Fnaf fan games within recent comparison. By the time Pizzeria Simulator came out, Fnaf was already starting to make some bank just the same. So it was a free game, but it did at least have some money backing it. But I will say that Pizzeria Simulator does get some slack. One of my points in Sister Location was to compare gameplay to price and doing that balancing. I won't do that here. Being free, Pizzeria Simulator isn't obligated to meet any specific amount of gameplay. However, I will still be critiquing said gameplay as though it was any other game. And with that, let's get into the gameplay. So Pizzeria Simulator's gimmick is that it's half a semi-traditional Fnaf game and half a, you guessed it, Pizzeria Simulator. Let's start with the simulator aspect. The main premise is that you buy a small building and start your own Freddy's kit and open your own Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. You use money you collect to upgrade its size, add more attractions and animatronics, and build it into a proper money-making machine. You have a catalog where you can buy the stuff, and then you can try it out with your allotted chances for the day. The process of picking out and buying stuff to decorate and upgrade your restaurant is kinda neat, especially with the multitude of animatronics, most of them being new variants of familiar characters, such as the Rockstar animatronics, who, while shown in the title screen and though they are the Freddy band of the game, don't have a big role in the game. Plus, you can buy attractions that then turn into minigames that you can play to earn coin to buy more attractions. When you play an attraction, you take the role as brand new character Helpy, as a stand-in for your character. Helpy is a little bear who looks a lot like Funtime Freddy. He's the character in the minigames, the little cheerleader in the catalog screen, and he even helps settle your lawsuits. I'll get back to that in a little while. The important part is that Helpy helps you play with your shiny new toys. Now, all of these minigames aren't created equally. Sometimes you'll have one that's picking up a balloon or choosing a duck, or Helpy fishing in a ball pit for Hellspawn. And then you'll have ones where you're flying through space dodging and shooting. The draw of these is to cycle more moolah back into the business. On the downside, you only get a set amount of games you can play per day before the night segment, so eventually you have to leave the simulator and get back to work. And that's kind of a shame. Now, there are 3 special minigames that I will describe, but save the story implications of them for later because they're lore relevant. Right now, I'll cover the basic gameplay. First is the Security Puppet minigame, which you get from buying the Security Puppet. You're a puppet looking for a child wearing a green bracelet. None of the kids have it. You don't do anything because if you grab a kid, the game will end. Pretty much this is just a cutscene that comes with your puppet statue. I changed my mind, I'm going to cover the cutscenes now because I don't want to come back to them later. After you play the game 3 times, the puppet gets outside to where they find a child laying in the alley, seemingly behind the business. The puppet, damaged by the rain, collapses by the child and the cutscene ends. Next is Midnight Motorist, a top-down arcade machine that you can play. You speed down the highway as fast as you can, dodging cars and keeping up speed while cool music plays in the background. It's pretty cool, but there's not too much incentive to replay. If you find the secret road, you get a cutscene where you drive down the road through the trees. You end up at a place called Junior's, or what I like to call it JR's, where a man throws you out, and then you go home, where you, the orange man, walks inside. You see, assumedly, your son sitting on the couch, and he's been having a bad day, so you decide to go chastise your other son who's in the back, but he's locked his door. So then you go around the house to the back of the house, and there's weird footsteps outside, and the window's been broken open. I will not bring this minigame up in the story section because, as of right now, years later, this minigame section has never truly been explained by the lore. A lot of people have theories, and they have good theories, but there has never been like a concrete, fitting puzzle piece in to explain what this minigame is. But I digress. Then there's Fruity Maze. This one's cool. It's like Pac-Man without ghosts, except the screen is zoomed in and you can get power-ups to help you collect the fruit. I'm not sure why, but I love this game. It's unfortunate that there's only really 1 maze and only 3 levels, and the last one is not fully functional for story reasons. It's the one minigame that really feels like a mini-game, you know? Not to spoil how this whole retrospective is going to go, but Fruity Maze is my favorite part of Pizzeria Simulator. Anyways, on to the story aspect. As we keep playing through, the maze becomes more deconstructed and glitched out. We start seeing little rabbits popping up and dead animals along the road, and in the reflection of the game, we can see a little blonde girl who is looking into the screen, smiling, and then she gets more upset, and then she starts crying, and by the time she's crying, we can see Springtrap looming over her shoulder. And the cutscene ends. I will actually address this one later, but that's it. Now, all of the attractions in animatronics have different stats. Entertainment stats, one's to show how much they entertain your customers and feed your business, and a liability stat. Not all of these machines are made equally, and there are plenty with warning signs slapped on them, and animatronics all but draped in red flags. If your liability is high, chances are you're looking at a lawsuit, during which Helpy will do your paperwork and you will have to dish out enough of your hard-earned cash to keep from getting closed down. The lawsuits ranging from, my child dropped their pizza slice and felt generally sad, to, my child is now on a ventilator while we try to retrieve Ned Bear's tooth out of his skull. You can even bankrupt yourself, which will lead to a failure ending. However, I found that I had to really try to get this ending. Like, you probably won't bankrupt yourself unless you're trying to, or you have an unfortunate streak of luck. There's also sponsorships. Basically, you agree to take on a sponsor, Lollies, L Chips, etc., and they put up some streamers in your business, then they might appear on your screen in the night segment. So basically you get a little extra money, but then you have an extra little annoyance that pops up at night. It's a trade-off. Now, I think that covers the simulator aspect of Pizzeria Simulator. I found myself having quite a bit of fun with the simulator. It's really cool. Except, and unfortunately, yes, there is an except, everything I mentioned is, in fact, a little bit shallow. Like, the first playthrough with Simulator was super neat. Any further ones and the cracks start showing. The minigames are kinda short, and the more impressive ones, Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, either cut you out after a few goes or really only have one go in them. The decorations are somewhat limited and very limited in where they can go, as is the layout of the building, with only a certain amount of stuff being stuck in very specific locations. That's not to say that the attractions aren't interesting, and they're really neat to look at, and it's cool to set them around and stuff, but there is that limitation kind of always looming over you. Animatronics, save the attraction ones, are limited to the stages alone, and up there they don't really do anything and don't have any further interactability. Everything in the simulator is, again, restricted, and all it takes is a little while with it before you start seeing the invisible walls. But I must insist on that, the reason these walls are so obvious is because the simulator is actually fun, and it functions, and it's good, it just needed a little more. But Pizzeria Simulator is a free game, and the simulator isn't the drawing point. The main gameplay is the nights, so it wasn't important. Well, unfortunately, since Pizzeria Simulator came out, something came out that sort of blew that excuse out of the water. Dayshift at Freddy's 3, a fan game also for free, on an assumedly low budget, had fully functional simulator gameplay. Dayshift at Freddy's 3, as well, was a parody of Pizzeria Simulator, but it still, in this aspect, kind of outdid it. Yeah, so there's not too much of an excuse for Pizzeria Simulator being so shallow. I think the biggest problem I have with it is that there does seem to be the idea and the skeleton of a really fun spin-off game that was kind of just put aside to be introduced into Fnaf 6. Like, I cannot say this for certain, but it kind of feels like Pizzeria Simulator and Fnaf 6 were two completely different games, and they were kind of put together, and that explains why Pizzeria Simulator feels a little shallow, and I'll get into Fnaf 6 in a moment, because there was a reason Fnaf 6 needed a little padding. Let's get to the office segments. So, Pizzeria Simulator's office segments are the main focus of the game. I mean, the simulator is the focus of the game, but these office segments are the backbone for the story. Every night or day, as the ambience sometimes sounds like there's people at the pizzeria sometimes, you go into this metal coffin with a handful of air vents, one screen, and a list of tasks that you have to do on said screen. Usually like click, 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 print, file, send, that sort of stuff. The first night is a waste of time, because there's only 4 animatronics and none of them are there. No Bonnie or Chica, no nothing. Dead silent until you get your paperwork filed correctly, for once. However, as the game continues along and you salvage more animatronics, or accidentally buy one, none the wiser, you get up to a whopping 4 animatronics who start trying to end you. I'll get into them in a minute, but from my experience, personally, it kind of felt like they all played exactly the same. Some were just a little more eager than others, that's just how I felt. Okay, a quick note here, I actually double-checked, and they do play exactly the same. Anyway, back to the retrospective. And part of the reason for that is because this is another FNAF 4-esque sound-based game. You don't see the animatronics at all unless they jump scare you or during the Salvage Minigame. And, unfortunately, FNAF 4 did better in making the animatronics patterns distinct. That is, by having each one come from a specific route or by having a specific telltale. You could even see them in the hallway, in the closet, and building up on the bed. Pizzeria Simulator does not have that. You listen for animatronics, but all of the extra details have been removed. For me, I find these nights pretty boring, and I don't just mean the first one. In fact, whenever I replayed Pizzeria Simulator, it was almost exclusively for the simulator aspect, and I pretty much never played after night 1 after my first playthrough. Not just because I have this slight little tiny hearing thing, but because I just couldn't click with this gameplay. I won't say Pizzeria Simulator has the worst office gameplay, because for some forsaken reason, Security Breach had office gameplay in it, and it was pretty bad. For the first time since FNAF 2, we also don't get any end-of-night story minigames anymore. I'll address that further in the story section. I suppose you can say that the secret minigames inside of the attractions replace that, but we kinda don't get like a step-by-step story throughout the nights. What we do get in between the nights is the Salvage Minigame, where you pull up animatronics from the alley and have to interview them without getting jump-scared. Basically, you play a series of prompts and mark on a paper whether or not they react. The paper doesn't matter. What does matter is knowing when or if the animatronics across from you move, and then shocking them to put them back in line. Salvaging successfully gives you money, and shocking more than 3 times degrades the animatronics enough that it loses value, so it's a balancing act. And it, too, is pretty neat. It gives some one-on-one time with the animatronics who, like I said earlier, we don't get a lot of one-on-one time with during the nights. I do have one thing I'm a little split on, though. So, the changes in aggression can be noticed with the slight changes of position, but it's hard to see. While that is the point, there is a part of me who almost wishes that we could see more movement from the animatronics, like looking down and then looking up only to have them halfway over the desk. That's not like a detracting point though, that's just me thinking out loud. I just want to see even more of these animatronics. And speaking of which, let's discuss the animatronics this time around. So I don't have to retrace my steps in the story segment, I'm just going to overview them in full, and then, yada yada yada. First off is Molten Freddy, the tangled mess of wires that used to be entered but has since been dominated by Funtime Freddy. He acts like Funtime Freddy, he has a broken Funtime Freddy voice, is not clarified to be entered, and not just Funtime Freddy in the games. With a creepy design and a creepier voice, Molten Freddy is bafflingly the first animatronic you encounter in the game. But he's still something. Next we have Afton. Formerly known as Springtrap, occasionally called Scrap Trap, this rotten rabbit has gone through a massive design change in between Sister Location and now, and no, it is never explained. He's also regained his voice, using it to go on about how smart he is and how evil he is. Afton's lines come off as a little faux edgy at times. Scrap Trap succeeds in making Afton look like a pompous, self-important fool, and not any form of threat, so if that was the intention, well done. Otherwise, I do find it odd that there was such a dramatic redesign in Springtrap, specifically in his face. While I've started to warm up to the design, it's hard to take him too seriously, and it's also kind of weird that the main villain of FNAF at this point was neither the scariest, nor the strongest, nor the last threat, nor the villain who gets a speech at the end. It's a choice. The next returning threat, the one teased in the opening of the game and who gets a major moment at the end, replacing Afton, is none other than Circus Baby, or Scrap Baby as she is now known. How did she become this? How did she separate from her bandmates? Well, it isn't explained in-game, but she has, and now she's a force to be reckoned with. She also now refers to herself as being Elizabeth, unlike Sister Location, and is now subservient to Afton, unlike Sister Location, and seems easily fooled, unlike Sister Location where she was the one doing the manipulating. I bring up Sister Location so readily because that was the last game, and there's not explanation for any of these 3. Your guess is as good as mine. Save that Baby acts a lot more like Novel Baby. Remember this. This is important for later. When the salt kicks in, onto the last character, Lefty. Lefty is an off-color Freddy, greatly resembling Rockstar Freddy, save his lazy eye. The Dark Bear has a mysterious secret hidden inside of his belly, and if not for that, Lefty would be, well, a little dull, admittedly. Lefty is made only by his secret, because elsewise he's just a busted Rockstar Freddy, borrowing some features from Golden Freddy, like the open mouth and head tilt, which would be interesting, but I mean, who just feels generally out of place up against the scrapped animatronics. He doesn't even have any voice lines, he just shushes, which is almost creepy, and it is also almost as edgy as Scrap Trap's "I taste fear and deep-fried pickles on your breath." Also, I forgot to mention that you can purchase him in the store early and get him into the nights faster, but I'm not sure why you would want to do that. Mostly on accident. And yes, those are our 4 animatronic threats. This is the smallest amount of threats in any FNAF game, except arguably FNAF 3, which only had 1 true animatronic, but a bunch of phantoms. And at least in that game, Springtrap and the phantoms acted differently from one another. These 4, once you get into gameplay, are virtually interchangeable. And that's the animatronics for you. So on the whole, here's the deal with the gameplay. The simulator section is a shallow but fun slice of gameplay that makes this FNAF game stand out, while the nighttime office segment is probably the most boring and tedious feeling gameplay in all of this series. And I haven't even tackled the ambiance of the office yet. I don't think there's any possible way that Pizzeria Simulator could have or should have been rushed, but it kind of feels rushed, if that makes any sense. It feels like a bigger game that was stripped down for time constraints. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad game or an awful game by far, but I am saying that the way its positives and negatives are arranged make it sort of a hot mess, but not like an experimental but curious game with positive and negatives like Sister Location. Compared to that, Pizzeria Simulator does kind of feel like a step down, setting aside the simulator elements. The simulator elements are its life preserver. And like I said earlier, it is possible, and it would actually explain all of these issues if FNAF 6 and Pizzeria Simulator were actually formed separately from one another and then merged into one. That would make total sense. That would explain why it feels rushed too, because both of the games became one and some stuff fell out in the middle. But Pizzeria Simulator isn't known for its gameplay. No, it's known for its story. It's known for its near-perfect ending to the Five Nights at Freddy's story at that point. So let's address that story, and then I can thoroughly tear it to shreds afterwards. Here is the story in full. You, main character, purchased a starter kit to open your own Freddy's. In the daytime, you mess around with your restaurant, and at night you drag in an animatronic from the alley, salvage it, and then do the night segment. Then after 5 days, one night ends differently. Scrap Baby comes on and goes on a little tirade about how you, the main character, were a pawn, and that this pizzeria was made to give children to the animatronics. She then says, "I will make you proud, Daddy," to you. But you're definitely not her daddy. He's in the Rotten Rabbit suit 2 rooms over. Then an unknown man comes on and reveals that Baby's only half right. This whole place was built as a trap to lure in the rest of the animatronics so that he can end Freddy's once and for all. He talks about the souls trapped in suits, he refers to Baby as Elizabeth, he tells Will he's going to hell, and he reveals that the puppet is his daughter. And unless you've got a completely different ending, you don't know the puppet's in Lefty. And unless you got a completely different ending, you don't know the puppet's in Lefty. Actually, rereading back this message here, yeah, it never really says the puppet's in Lefty. I mean, we know he is, but it doesn't actually say it here. Even then, the arm matches in stripes but doesn't match any known puppet models. So yeah, let's hope you did, or this just kinda sounds like a random anecdote. By the way, remember the prize puppet? Yeah, that's my kid. He then says that you weren't supposed to be here, but he has a hunch that you want to be here and that everyone's going to go together and finally rest. The place burns down, and then we hard cut to the graves of the missing children, who apparently weren't released in FNAF 3? FNAF 3 just lied to us. Or maybe they were and we just, decided to look at their graves for some reason. Then the game ends, or, well, the ending finally stops. Now see, when I explain it bluntly like that, I'm sure you can already see some of the little crackles popping up, but if not, then allow me to clarify. First off, you know how I critiqued Security Breach's story by saying that it had a beginning and a partial middle of the story, but no real Act 3, it just sort of stops? Well, Pizzeria Simulator has no beginning or middle, it just kinda takes an info dump and stops. And in this game, it's very noticeable because the one before it was Sister Location, and since then, things happened off-screen that we're simply not aware of. Indeed, Pizzeria Simulator not only feels weirdly detached from the games before it, but it feels like there was a game missing between the two. And the info dump reeks of rushing. Not rushing the game, but rushing to get out so many unestablished details. This ending reads more like the character encyclopedia than the actual character encyclopedia did. And in a more meta sense, the game is quite specifically reenacting FNAF 3's ending even though FNAF 3 already happened. Which means that the audience is already going to have that tiny little voice in the back of their head saying, "Oh, didn't we do this before? Didn't we burn Afton before? Didn't we set the kids free before? Why are we focusing on the missing children again? Did they come back? Well, it must have happened off screen, and yeah, a lot of stuff happened off screen. But I'm going to get there in a minute. Because you know what I'm going to talk about now. You know what I'm going to talk about. I'm about to talk about how Pizzeria Simulator irreparably destroyed the story with the introduction of one character, and before you tune out, hear me out. We're talking about the Tape Man himself. Though first, let me just say Tape Man himself is a pointless character in the grand scheme of things. By which I mean in the gameplay plot, period. You had established main character Mike Michael who could have filled this role and it would have made more sense and meant more, but nah. By the way, we don't know if we play as Michael. It was only hinted in a book release, if I recall, after this game. And one line, "You're not the one who's supposed to be here, but I think you're where you need to be," which a lot of folks took this as a confirmation of Michael, but the way I see it, it's way too vague for anyone to concretely pin anyone down, just confusing enough to make you unsure. And let me clarify, I do think this is Michael. I just think it's a story problem that I can't for sure say it's Michael. You know? Which means, yes, as the supposed end of Michael's story, this does a really, really unsatisfying and lackluster job of acting like it, shoving him aside for the man. Anywho, back to how the Tape Man ruined the story. Let's get into what actually happened. The Tape Man is Henry. He is not named in the games, save a little name hint and a secret ending, and his deal, other than calling William his old friend and having a child who passed away, is 100% unknown in the context of the games. You don't know that he helped Will open Freddy's, that many of the animatronics are by his design, and that he used to wear the yellow bear suit, any of that. You don't know him. Unless you read the books. Yeah, we just hit not only the biggest problem with Pizzeria Simulator's story, but what I believe broke FNAF's plot. To get vital information about name-dropped major characters, you have to read a book series that Scott himself has said is an alternate continuity and gets some stuff wrong, such as the details of the missing children. Like, the details of the missing children's Susie, I'll touch upon it later, are correct and the same between the game and the book. And then other things aren't, such as the book saying that Cassidy is Bonnie, when Cassidy is baited heavily as being Golden Freddy in the games, though not confirmed. You see the problem. You're telling me to get these details, I have to read an unrelated but related book and try to sort out what parts of it are game accurate and which aren't. That's homework. I'm way too old to be doing homework. This is most obvious in the situation with the puppet. We know little about the puppet except that he looks like the crying child, the Save Him minigame was assumedly his backstory, and Ultimate Custom Night confirms that he is male. Pizzeria Simulator tells us that no, he is actually Henry's unnamed daughter, who we can only learn from the books is named Charlie. They even recreate the Save Him minigame except with a bunch of details changed to be Charlie's backstory, hidden in the security puppet minigame. Also, sorry, another quick note here, but I only noticed this while I was putting the video together. They actually show the Save Him minigame before the Save Her minigame in Henry's big speech at the end. So yeah, they're trying to say that these are the absolute same event. And yeah, I know how to spell. Oh, so this explains it. The puppet, the Save Him minigame, Charlie is the little boy from the Save Him minigame. What? Yeah, I will not discuss my conspiracy theory here, but I don't believe for a hot second that Charlie was originally supposed to be the puppet. Maybe her twin brother who was introduced in the books, but not her. Which means, you will have had to read the books for this character to matter too. And you will have had to read the books and keep in mind that Charlie isn't the real Charlie too. Except you can't do that because the Fourth Closet came out a little while after this game. What a dysfunctional clusterfunk. She is only here for name recognition alone, as she and the puppet have virtually nothing in common. Like, for example, the puppet is a protector of children, brings them back to life as animatronics. Charlie doesn't even save the kids in her book. She has zero connections with any kids, period. You're also pretty aware that The Silver Eyes was not originally supposed to be a trilogy. It was one book expanded into 3, and in 2 and 3, Charlie becomes a vastly different character. So, yeah, something's smelling a little off in Denmark. And before you think I'm just fooling myself here because I don't like the books, I don't like Charlie, I do like Charlie. I think some of the books make her act extra stupid, but the Silver Eyes novel and the Twisted Ones graphic novel, shockingly enough, make a pretty likable character. It's not because Charlie is the puppet and the crying child isn't. It's because we got a name slapped on a character, and I don't know who in the bloody hay he is. And guesstimation is the best we've got to go on. And if you don't believe me that the books are vital sources of material to read to understand this game, Susie, the missing child, has her story partially shown in the game Fruity Maze. But the vague way the story is shown, is that a bear, or a bunny, or a dog, means that you have had to read the books where she hints towards the same backstory to fully grasp what's happening here. So why all the book references? Or why is Pizzeria Simulator so reliant on the books that it feels more like a continuation of them than the games before it? Well, I have a better question. How long does it take to write a book? As someone who's written a book and went a little slow, I'd say somewhere between 1 to 5 years. Some take longer, some are shorter. Ones that are short stories may come out quicker, but novels, especially in a trilogy, will be planned in advance. And I mention this because the Twisted Ones had just come out, and the Fourth Closet was being written, or was somewhere in production, to come out a few months later. So all of these story beats were thrust into the game ironically at the same time the books were being written. Specifically, The Fourth Closet, the sexy baby robot Charlie daddy issues book. And if you think that The Fourth Closet was too far off to affect this game, look no further than the Twisted Ones. Hot Charlie, who was actually Circus Baby, was revealed at the end of the Twisted Ones, so that plot point was already in play. The Fourth Closet plot was no doubt already concocted, and it no doubt played a huge part in the changes between Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator, because even though it hadn't released yet, both were planned and made at the same exact time. Yeah, and this makes Pizzeria Simulator a big advertisement for the books. That doesn't date the game at all. And I'm sure it doesn't, trip up its plot and ignore more important characters and events to shove in these book ones like Michael. It means that between Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator, if you want any idea of what the hell is going on, you must read these books. The trilogy that's supposedly not canon, let me point to the whole Molten Freddy thing once more. But that's the only way for you to get vital details for this game. But only some of the details are correct. Some of them are wrong and some of them are different. And you have to. Because why are we supposed to care about Henry if we don't know who he is? Pizzeria Simulator counts on you reading The Silver Eyes and the Twisted One to get the references. And wait, it gets better. Because there's a huge chunk of stuff missing between Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator. I've said it about 20 times now, so I'm sure you remember. So I don't have to rant too long about this, let me list them off. Here is all the stuff that happened between Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator that was not seen in either games or books. Firstly, Circus Baby splits from Ennard. She becomes Scrap Baby, Ennard becomes Molten Freddy. There's a source code hint that shows dialogue between the two when they split, very basic stuff. Say goodbye to our friend. I'll put myself back together. Okay, you do that. Also, I'm just Funtime Freddy now. But yeah, how did Baby become Scrap Baby? Why is she suddenly Elizabeth? I've heard a popular theory that when she split from Ennard, she suddenly realized, wait, I'm actually Elizabeth. I think instead her brain got swapped for High School Mean Girl, the Fourth Closet sexy baby. Also, Ennard, the big bad of Sister Location, the one who was this powerful threat that was actually dangerous, was downgraded massively. Coincidentally, Ennard is not in the Fourth Closet books. Oh, and by the way, if I recall right, the blueprint that says Molten Freddy is Ennard was not in the Pizzeria Simulator game. Let me repeat that. the blueprint that says Molten Freddy is entered, not Funtime Freddy alone, but that Ballora and Funtime Foxy are silent but present, is not in the game. Okay, next point, Springtrap morphed into Scrap Trap and it's never explained. As recently as Sister Location, he is shown to be looking like Springtrap, now a Scrap Trap. This could just be a redesign, but it's noticeable. Next, how did the puppet get into Lefty? We know it did. I mean, they never said it, but we know it did. But come on, could we have not seen that? Minigame-wise, forget redoing Save Him. Seeing the puppet getting snatched up by Lefty would have killed me. It would have deeply gutted me, scooped out my ink heart and killed me, and I would have loved it. And to clarify, all three of these could have been explained easily and quickly in end-of-night minigames. Point is, yeah, there was a lot of stuff missing between point A and point C, and it does affect how efficient the ending is because it feels like Sister Location was starting something new, and then immediately afterwards, we're having FNAF 3 again, and we're coming to a dead stop. And you might be thinking that these are details in the whole. It doesn't affect how good Pizzeria Simulator's ending is, but it does. Do you remember the ending to Toy Story 3? The one that everyone says is perfect? Imagine the ending to Toy Story 3, except we don't know any of the toys. Woody gets no speaking lines, Andy's dad shows up at the end and gives a long speech about family, and by the way, the first 2 acts of the movie didn't happen, it's just the ending. Pizzeria Simulator's ending isn't just not perfect. I go out on a limb and say it was disappointing. Not because FNAF was going to end, but because it went out with a, what the hell was that? So yeah, Pizzeria Simulator's story kinda blows, and I blame it personally for our current story issues. Because yeah, the flip-flop characters, confusion with the books, big plot twists, it all started in that smoky basement. Pizzeria Simulator's story is a mess, and its ending only works if you both have someone explain it to you, but also don't because going in with all the knowledge beforehand kinda ruins the experience. The only reason it is being seen as such a great ending is because it's poignant. But it's only poignant because it's a martyr's pyre sacrifice alongside a bunch of characters who we don't have any attachment with because they're so detached from the characters we once loved. Once you start thinking about it in any regard, you start to see that something went a little wrong here. But since I am here, let me discuss the other non-canon endings. There are 3 failure endings and one that I would more consider a secret ending. If you go bankrupt, you get the bankruptcy ending. Basically, the game calls you a loser and kicks you out. If you manage to accrue a liability risk of 50 or above, you will receive a slightly different ending called the blacklisted ending, and then you get kicked out. If you finish with no points, somehow, not buying or upgrading anything, you get the mediocrity ending. These 3 endings are basically the same, just different routes to failure, as you can't have the final confrontation at the end, it stops. The secret ending is called the insanity ending, and this one is pretty interesting. Basically, if you buy this horrendous thing called an egg baby and poke a few buttons, you will trigger a secret audio log from Henry. This is the secret log where we actually get his name, or parts of it. Basically, Henry laments his guilt and says he's planning to end it all, but not until he finally goes and does something about this Afton problem. After watching this tape, good-natured Henry proceeds to have you thrown into an asylum and implies that you'll be getting lobotomized. All to cover up this less than incriminating tape. Great guy, really. The last ending is called the Lore Keeper ending, and it's kind of not an ending. It's basically the true ending, where everything burns except you also found the secrets in Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, and the security puppet game. It's just an extra award for finding everything lore-related. So on the story spectrum, Pizzeria Simulator isn't doing that great. It has more story than some of the earlier games, but it's delivered worse. In this sense, it really does feel like Security Breach. Stick Security Breach's front on Pizzeria Simulator's back, and you'd have a complete but still pretty flawed story. And the worst part is that it's the end. The ending was so rushed for what? To move on to another story. Well, that would be great, but our new characters and our new story replicates our old one. Was it that necessary to get this thing over and done with? I don't know. All I know is that folks may quote that series go on too long, but believe you me, a bad ending can dissolve a story just as fast as one that goes on too long. And now that we are finally done with that, dear heavens, that took way longer than I expected, let's hit the design aspect of Pizzeria Simulator. So Pizza Simulator is actually pretty interesting in the design aspect. In the simulator, we are able to see inside of a working Freddy's, but cartoony and cute. Something between Fnaf World and Fnaf itself. The attraction minigames are pretty charming, the pixelated games look nice, the security puppet is adorable, Helpy is adorable, and the atmosphere is just very pleasant. It does give off that sort of Fnaf World feel, but not in a spin-off way. And then we get to this dreary, boring office. It's definitely a mood, I'll give you that, but not exactly a good one. The office segments are rather depriving. You just stare at the wall and listen and wait. Wait for things to print. Wait for animatronics to come closer, with nothing to look at. You can't even see the animatronics down the shafts. So, half and half. Half of the game has a unique and charming pizzeria to snazz up, and the other half is the ugliest office in FNAF history. I feel like a dynamic like this is poised to work. The cutesy stuff playing against the hidden horrors, but regardless, the office is a downgrade. Now on to the animatronics themselves. Helpy, even though he isn't an animatronic, is adorable and is just a really cool little mascot. Newcomer animatronics are also designed very well, such as the wonderfully horrendous Music Man, the return of Chipper as El Chip, finally the reveal of Funtime Chica. The knockoff mediocre Melody characters have a bit of charm too, because they do have that cheap, partial rip-off feel while still standing out. The only ones I would say are a little meh are the Rockstars. I like Rockstar Foxy with the parrot and peg leg, Rockstar Chica's pretty unique, but Freddy and Bonnie are pretty lackluster. They're all kinda basic to me, but they get the job done. But now on to the real main band, the scrapped monstrosities and Lefty. Starting with Molten Freddy. So while I feel like Molten Freddy is effectively a lesser innard, I must say that his design is really cool. Even if you're not really able to see his wiry lower half in the game, safe sort of in that secret alley cutscene. It's an unsettling design that's not utilized in full because of the game's limitations on showing the animatronics. Like, seeing him crawling through a vent would have gone a long way, like in the glitched attraction. So yeah, I would say that Molten Freddy is a good design. Scrap Trap doesn't look as bad as I used to think, but he still does look pretty goofy. And the biggest issue by far is that he doesn't look threatening. Unlike Springtrap, Afton is gaunt, he's missing an arm, and his face is kinda wonky. So as a gag character, he's cool, but I have trouble taking him seriously, especially compared to Springtrap. Now I'm a big Puppet fan, huge Puppet fan, and Lefty, yeah, I don't really feel Lefty. I think the fact that a design as cool as the puppets was upgraded into a downgraded Recolor Freddy wasn't the best move. And when I say Recolor, I mean Recolor. Other than the eye, Lefty is a near exact recolor of Rockstar Freddy. Other than the red accents, he holds none of the puppet's interesting design quirks. No tears, no stripes, just a boring black bear who looks like he's been throwing back a few too many. I feel like it wouldn't have taken a lot to make the design a little more unique, but I think making it look so much like Rockstar Freddy was kind of to its detriment. So, Molten Freddy looks good, Scrap Trap is an acquired taste, Lefty's kind of a waste of an idea, there's two bears by the way, and then there's Scrap Baby, who is probably my favorite of the bunch. I can't say Scrap Baby is the best designed, but, well, maybe of this bunch, yes, but I love her design. From the broken features, to the dummy mouth, to the roller skate feet, which are seldom seen, they're only seen in the alleyway, but they're cool. To the highlight of her appearance, the giant claw mounted on her right arm. I believe this was confirmed somewhere that this is the same claw that was inside of Circus Baby, and it kind of matches the vague shapes in sister location, so I'd say this lines up. That's a cool detail. Scrap Baby is threatening and creepy, and really is the next step of Baby design-wise. The withered form of Circus Baby, now with many more sharp bits and means to move a lot faster. She's a degraded baby, but she's also improved. Less of a pretender and more of a predator. But, alas, we don't get to see this design used in full in this game, so fingers crossed that Help Wanted 2 gives us some of that sweet, sweet visual action with her. Finally, the last part of the design that I haven't covered, the music. Now, I really like the music of Pizzeria Simulator. The bouncy themes such as Scoop and a Slice and Just Add Water, 4 Bits to the Left, that's the theme of Fruity Maze, and it's just so jovial and bouncy, but then it degrades with each playthrough along with the minigame itself, which is a really cool touch. Alchemist Fantasy is the security puppet song, and I like that one too, but that might be a bias towards it being puppet related. But the standouts here are Midnight Motorist smashing windshields, and Legal Woes, the song that plays when you have a lawsuit, and Nowhere to Run, a remake of Fnaf World's Underground 2 and played when Henry has his big speech. You've heard both Smashing Windshields and Legal Woes in this video already, and many other of my videos. They're just that good. And surprisingly enough, I really like one of the ambiance tracks for the Office segments. Now, I've never heard this in-game, but in this segment you can hear music and children's voices, like games and attractions, distant through the walls in the background. It gives me a vibe that, like those videos that are like listening to Flagpole Sitta, but you're in the bathroom in an abandoned mall. It gives a feel, and I appreciate that. So if there's one thing I can say about the Office segment, that track, if it is in the game, is very well done. In fact, I'd say, in general, all of the music in Pizzeria Simulator is very good. All in all, I'd say the presentation on this game is pretty good. Like, my only main qualm with the presentation would be the office and how that's set up, and that kind of more plays into the gameplay than the presentation. But on the whole, I would say that the presentation is very good. So, here are my final thoughts. You may think I hate Pizzeria Simulator. I don't. I just think that it has a lot of flaws. And a good chunk of these flaws are ones that are always present. It's not like Sister Location, where a lot of the flaws show themselves on repeat playthroughs. Things like the Office section are present and accounted for, and in my opinion, compared to the games before them, feel like a step back. I do appreciate the experimental nature of the simulator though, and even if it's not that beefy, I did have fun with it. I feel like that, in specific, should be brought back someday. In a way, it's almost unfair that Pizzeria Simulator is FNAF 6, because it feels like there had to be a pullback on possibilities to support that dual purpose. And because it was some kind of big ending that answered questions and gave out lore, it gives Pizzeria Simulator certain expectations that handicap it further. The story... I definitely think that this was the point where the story went wonky. Like, I see what the intention was, but I don't understand why the execution came out like this. Do I think the ending would have been better without the convoluted connections to the books, which makes the books necessary to read to understand the ending? Yes, but that's not the only issue with the story. The stuff left off screen, the rushed nature, the anticlimactic stop to the story, those are still there even without the book stuff. There is a quote from Alice in Wonderland. They're at a court, and the King of Hearts says to the White Rabbit, he says, "Begin at the beginning, go on till you reach the end, then stop." Note that he does not say, begin around the middle, go on, and then dive out of the car while it drives off the cliff and crashes into a blazing inferno. Literal inferno in this case. And I will be honest, I probably wouldn't be drilling in the point so much if this game had been held up for a while as the pinnacle of storytelling. If it was, as I said at the beginning of this video, I might have played that up in my head, but I'm not trying to be a party pooper raining on anyone's parade, but I just, I want a little more. It all. I want it all. I want everything. But of course, that wasn't the only issue with Pizzeria Simulator. Pizzeria Simulator is a game in an identity crisis. It's a fun and inventive, but shallow Freddy simulator, but it's also a pretty dull Office Survive the Nights game. I'm not sure which of these was the latter edition, but I do feel like the game suffered from trying to get too much done at once. But Fruity Maze was great. I think I've said my piece on Pizzeria Simulator. Soon Help Wanted 2 will be out and Pizzeria Simulator will be revisited there, and I'm curious to see if this second chance utilizes some of the concept this game began. I doubt the simulator aspect will be coming back, but it will be nice to see some of the characters return, and who knows? But we'll see. In the meantime, thank you for watching.